Hey.
But you can't record for the theme song.
Yes, I can.
Oh.
Sherry, we have our own theme song. I've been to Romamu, I've been to BJ. I searched all over for a place to pray. I found the mosh pit and knew that this was it. I am a moshnik and I'm here to stay. And I'm turning gray. I found community that is in tune with me, singing and dancing in my Zuma God. Some contemplation mixed with elation. Wow! I am a moshnik and I'm here to stay. And I'm turning gray. Well, actually turning kind of white. A chance to meet you, a chance to greet you, a time to deepen what it means to belong. Let's have some fun tonight and spread some joy and light. I am a moshnik and I'm here to stay. And we're turning gray. Let's hear from Hop on High. A little harmonica solo from Shemayim. A late beloved Hop. Oh, that's a nice little new reverb there. I like that at the end. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of the reverb because you didn't like it, Devorah. I told Devorah before we came on, I have a new toy this evening. I'm not going to play with it too much, but I can add a little reverb. Oh, at least what else I can do? This is pretty cool. Gail, it is really good to see you. Gail, it is really good to see you. Oh, Gail, it is really good to see you. Alice, it is really good to see you. Gail, it is really good to see you. Oh, Gail, Alice, it is really good to see you. Oh, Gail, Alice, it is really good to see you. Oh, Sherry, Gail, Alice, it is really good to see you. Oh, Gail, Alice, it is really good to see you. Well, maybe
Gary,
I'll just.
He's never done this before, just so you're not like surprised.
I have new toys in front of me, so it's always fun. All righty. So I'm not completely winging it this morning because I'm going to be leaning into some teachings from the Piaseczner Rebbe. The Piaseczner Rebbe, a Hasidic Rebbe from the Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto, who refused to leave. He had an opportunity to leave to be saved, but he decided to stay with his Hasidim and subsequently was killed in one of the camps. He buried, or someone buried, his teachings in a cylinder, and years later his teachings were found, which gave rise to a book called Eish Kodesh, which means holy fire, which is, it ended up being today, so we're not talking about that long ago, 80 years ago. It is a prime Hasidic book to lean into. He also wrote a book called Conscious Community that helps us learn how to live consciously in relationship with each other and how to create a community in which that can happen. I think that we have done that to a great extent here at Moshe, that we've created a container in which relationships can be built in that way.
What language did he
taught
write?
in Yiddish. I want to share a story with you first. So there once was a chassid who used to go to study with Reb Chaim Halberstam of Sants. The chassid would travel a long distance to be with his Rebbe on the way there and back. He'd pass through a small town where he stayed for Shabbos. And the rabbi in that town, he kind of fancied himself to be a shtickler Rebbe, right? Though he didn't have many followers like the Rebbe that this chassid would go to visit. But he says to the chassid, I can teach you. I'm closer than schlepping all the way to Sans. Why don't you study with me? Well, the chassid responded, well, maybe so, but in Sans, they teach me how to be a Yodea Machshava. A Yodea Machshava. That's one who understands consciously where another human being is. Not so much a mind reader, but really tapping into another person's heart and soul. Okay? To perhaps divine their thoughts and concerns. So the local Rebbe, he says, really? If you can do that, what am I thinking now? Well, this is easy, says the chassid. You're thinking Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. I keep God before me always. No, said the rabbi triumphantly. That's not what I'm thinking. Ah, no, said the chassid. Now you see why I go to Sans. Right? Hey, Dan, welcome. So this story is a nice illustration, I think, of what my intention, my kavanah is for tonight. We are not going to be talking about the efficacy of prayer. We're not going to be talking about what is prayer. We're not even going to be looking at the word for prayer, lehit palel in Hebrew, which, by the way, is a reflexive verb. Instead, I'm picking up on what Reb Nadia taught during the 2 times that she was with us. Welcome, Miriam Ruth. You win. And with Devorah, you were here twice today. Sherry, we also meet at noon on Wednesdays for meditation. What I want to pick up on what Reb Nadia said was that she doesn't pray to, that she prays through. You remember what she said that, for those of you who were there? Mm-hmm. That really struck me. For me, it liberated me. Not that I was in need of liberation from God as object, but it was just a nice way to think of prayer and to think of myself even more deeply as a conduit for prayer, which is something that, you know, I'm preaching that all the time, am I not? That the word for conduit in Hebrew is a tsinor, right? So you know what a conduit is. You know, if you're working, you have wires that go through a conduit. So in the same way, prayer, or certainly the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, that divinity lives through us and speaks through us, you know, perhaps in Heschel's words, God in search of man and woman. So that struck me very deeply, and I loved it. Pray through, I don't pray to. Well, of course, Reb Nadia is steeped in Hasidic waters. Those waters run deep for her, having been a musmechet of Reb Zalman of blessed memory, and drinking the waters of Hasidut, of Hasidic thought. The underpinning, of course, which Maloch Ola Aretz Kavodo. I once in a smicha class, while I was still in my rabbinical program, taking a class on Chassidut, on Hasidic thought, the very first thing that the teacher asked, what is the most important thing about, what is Hasidim, what's the ikar, what's the essence? My hand shot up. And it was Maloch Ola Aretz Kavodo. The whole world is filled with divine presence. So what does that mean? It means all those sparks, you know, that were released in the process of creation when the Big Bang happened, right, are embedded in you, embedded in me, embedded in everything that surrounds us. And when something dies, it never dies. It only returns to its source, right? And all those sparks are spread, you know. Joni Mitchell would say that we have to find our way back to the garden. Well, that's the way, or one way in which we find our way back, is that those sparks. And that's what tikkun olam is. You know, it's come to mean in modern parlance of repair of the world, but it's really repair of those sparks that were released, you know, in the moment of divinity, doing tzimtzum, of drawing in that deep breath, and then, you know, Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam, the one who spoke, and then everything came into being in combination of permutations of letters, and all containing those holy sparks. You know, obviously, I think a lot about this, and I have marinated in Hasidic thinking. And when I am praying, I consciously let go of everything I might be holding on to, physically, emotionally, in the world of Bria, intellectually, to leave room for eternity to kind of like brush by me, you know, like those butterflies, the wings of the butterflies, you know. In that way, I practice Shiviti. I practice Shiviti Adonai Lenegdi Tamid, or Shiviti Havaya. You know, Havaya is a permutation of the word of God's name, Yud He Vav He, which is understood as the ground of all being. You know, we are grounded beings, right? You know, if you're not grounded, you know, you put your finger on some electric, you get a little spark, and but we are grounded in presence. But we forget. You might want to make a mental note here, because my Devar Torah, the Shabbos, is going to be all about remembering through the process of tzitzit, which is mentioned in this week's Torah, and the repetition of Adonai, Ani Adonai Elohechem, which appears in the last line, in which we chant every week when we kiss our tzitzit. Alrighty, so just make a mental note, bookmark that. Oh yeah, and if I have time tonight, I might even share a little bit of that wonderful teaching with you. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like us to chant Shiviti Adonai Lenegdi Tamid. Some of you know it. Some of you know this particular melody. I'm going to do it enough times so that it. You remember we had records in the old days, right? LPs that spun around, and what was in there? There were grooves, right? So we're going to create a groove, you know, and this is the way, and we're going to rely on this groove later on to use, maybe with the words, but maybe easier without the words, just as a niggun, right? Because when you get in the groove, that's when you really begin the process of letting go, of eliminating all distractions. And that's when prayer has its greatest efficacy. That's when our minds are clearest. This is beautiful stuff for, you know, us mushpa'im and mushpa'ot, you know, Miriam Ruth, right? Us, you know, spiritual companions, spiritual directors, because this is where you need to be when you companion another person. But you don't have to be a spiritual director. You can be a good friend. This is where you have to be when you're listening, right? With real, you know, shema-ness. When we're being shema-nick, you know, pun intended, you know. Can you hear the piano? So I'm going to screen share this with you so that you can see it for those if you don't know it.
Can you remind me the translation of Shiviti?
I set eternal presence before me always. Shiviti is I put to, or I sit before.
I sit, so it's shed.
But it's really to set something. And lenegdi is against me or before me. Tamid, always. Shiviti havaya lenegdi tamid. We're not going to do the second part. We're just going to use the first part. Shiviti havaya lenegdi tamid. Sing it with me. Shiviti havaya lenegdi tamid. Shiviti havaya lenegdi tamid. And like with any good niggun, we might repeat it, or any good chant, over and over and over and over, until we, I like to say, lose ourselves and find ourselves simultaneously. Right? We forget about ourselves. I already quoted Joni Mitchell, but you know that beautiful song, I am on a lonely road and I am traveling. You know what she says? I love you when I forget about me. Right? So there's something happens in there, in the letting go of our egoic self, that enables us to unconsciously to be connected to each other. Marlena, welcome. So we're going to come back to using this niggun, right? Dan, you don't even have to worry what it means. My dear friend Alice Bayless is here. And Alice, I think I might have said this to you before here, but we had this discussion years ago, how the Lashon Kodesh, you know, the holy language, even when we don't understand it, opens gates that are that only in Hebrew can unlock. Do you have any recall, Alice, of us having this conversation? Because I remember that we did. That, you know, it'd be long before I even knew what all of this meant. So, you know, if you're not thinking in Hebrew, part of our challenge is to stop thinking, right? Or as David Byrne would say, stop making sense, right? And give into, in this case, the niggun, right? Let's get back to the Piaseczner Rebbe and some of his really deep Eitzah, his deep advice. Anyone at any level can reach into the living waters of the soul and pour forth the living voice within him. This is a powerful tool for unblocking and expressing the soul. Now, how is that accomplished? Melodies are one tool for conveying our feelings and our spiritual condition, right? And he's talking most specifically about a niggun, right? So remember that the niggun is a construct of Hasidic thought, that a simple melody is a prayer and a gateway and a key that unlocks all locks. That you don't have to be a Torah scholar or a Talmud Chacham, you know, to be in relationship with Hashem. I asked the question because this is something that I've been thinking a lot about. What are other tools? Melodies are one tool, he says. What are some other tools for conveying our feelings and our spiritual condition? What are some other tools that you might use to be praying without a prayer book?
It could be dance, movement.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I'm thinking of, and we're in alignment here, Gail. So, for those of you, if you remember Jules Pfeiffer cartoons, you know that the dancer becomes the dance, right? The dancer becomes at one with the dance. That when the choreography is no longer has to be remembered, but is grooved, you know, in the groove, right? If you saw the Tony Awards on Sunday night, right? Those dancers were not thinking about what their next moves were, right? They had rehearsed it and so many times. Then you can first be in ecstasy, really close to the flame. So dance, what else? Anybody? What are other tools? What might other be expressions that be used to get us to there? Dan, I see you.
I'm thinking drumming and rhythm.
Yes,
Without
absolutely.
melodies.
Yeah. So you drum and you get into the rhythm. I mean, that's why jump circles are so powerful, right? Alice, you're muted. You want me to unmute you?
Walking in the woods.
Yeah. Remember, Thich Nhat Hanh has a beautiful instruction. Walk as if your feet are kissing the ground. Right. That also is prayer, Devorah. And then
Meir's hand is up first.
Okay, Meira, Devorah bows to you.
Thank you, Devorah. I appreciate your acknowledgement. What I like to do is I like to go into nature and just have very a present-minded focus, and I write it down in poetry form.
Yeah.
And if we have some time at any point, I have something I wrote today, and I have something I wrote as a result of Shabbos that I was going to send to you, but I never did.
Why don't you just tell me what the right moment is for the one that you wrote today?
Whenever it feels right to you.
Well, this feels right to me. Go ahead.
All right. Well, this is what I wrote on Shabbat. This is what I wrote as part of being at Moshe on a Shabbat. I wrote, "Let me access my deep connection to love. May my thoughts, words, and actions be sourced from this deep connection, allowing your love to ripple in the world on a trajectory of compassion, peace, and well-being for all." That was inspired by me.
Ooh. Now you need to repeat that last line and leave a little quiet afterwards.
Allowing your love to ripple in the world on a trajectory of compassion, peace, and well-being for all.
Shiviti Havaya Lenegdi Tami Thank you so much, Ira. You see, the silence is as important as the poem, because in the silence, it allows the wisdom to emerge. It allows something which unexpected to emerge that will then reflect back on you as prayer does, right? So it's, Rabbi Shefa Gold teaches us all the time in chanting practice. And we know from Torah that the spaces between the letters are as important and speak louder perhaps than the words. So we need to listen to the silence and hear what the silence has to say as well. And we'll be getting that there in a few minutes. Devorah and then Miriam Ruth. We were talking about what are other tools.
So for me, just walking in a forest is quietly, well, it is quiet. Whatever I decide to do, like lean on trees or pick up leaves or whatever it is that I do in the forest, that is a really good way to connect. And something that's so clear to me very recently is that people who are gardeners, and people who garden and really get really in it, as those who do, like you described, I think that's a way of connecting. So it's part of the earth. It's part of it's allowing creation. It's just, I think it's another really good way of connecting.
As a gardener, I know that to be true.
Okay.
I ate my first cucumber today from the garden. It was a Shechayanu moment. Miriam Ruth.
I love to just go and stand in front of like two really special trees in my yard, and I can also see each of them from a window on the second floor. And there's just so much about breathing them in. And other times especially as it starts like this time of night, I like to light a candle, and the candles that I have are scented. So I don't have incense, but I have I like to embody by breathing in the scent, and also by seeing the light, and seeing the light as it dances on the ceiling or dances, and just sit in silence with the connection through those two senses.
So there's a common thread running through here, which is hitbodedut, as Reb Nachman Bratzlaff encourages us to be alone in nature and allow nature to speak to us. I do want to invite you all to do what Gail you said you do, is allow poetry to arise, right? And I want to invite you and encourage you to allow that to happen improvisationally. In other words, allow the moment that all of this is happening for you, Mary Rita, I'm just using you as an example, for something to emerge that then becomes articulated. And when you do it, say it out loud enough so that your ears can hear it. And we're going to hear from Reb Zalman before we're done about why it's important, even in a silent prayer, for us to hear our own voices. Okay? Back to the Piaseczner. You are here. I think what he's saying is the reason for our existence. To pour out your soul to God using music and voice. Singing from the depths of your being, inevitably, you will begin to feel the emergence of your soul, her great joy and delight. At first, it was you singing to your soul to wake her up, And now you feel the soul singing her own song. This is deep stuff, right? This assumes that each of us senses something that we call neshama, soul, right? That a soul that is eternal, that lives beyond this lifetime, and that there is a spiritual way to access that unique soul that is embedded within you. At first, it was you singing to your soul to wake her up, right? So we might wake up in the morning singing, Modani lefanecha, Modani lefanecha, Moda. I'm singing to God. I'm singing, I'm waking reawakening my soul. If I sing it enough times over and over and over again, my question is, who is doing the singing? Or who's on first? When the musician becomes the music, the Spirit of God is upon. Right? This is why in Tanakh, when Shmuel loses temporarily his ability to be a Navi, to be a prophet, who does he call? Who does he call? He calls the musicians. He calls the musicians. The musicians start playing, and it awakens the Ruach HaKodesh. It awakens his nevuah, his ability to prophesize, which I take to mean to be so present that you can hear past, present, and future simultaneously, to really be plugged into the mainframe. Now, if you were thinking that you need to, I have to be a composer to do this. I can't do this. I don't write music. This is all the Piaseczner. You do not necessarily need to compose your own songs. If someone wanted to drink wine, he would not say he needed to plant a vineyard. But this is why you need to really gather a suitcase full, a repertoire of songs that are meaningful to you, that resonate. In the same way that Renee always says, it's hard. The hardest thing about storytelling is to find a story that you want to tell, right? Because not every story you read is going to be one that resonates with you, that feels like something that you can bring to life. Some stories should be left better on the written page. They're really meant to read. They're not stories that lend themselves to be told orally. And that's why folktales are so wonderful and so easy to do that with, because, hey, they've got a good track record. And also you can make them your own. There's no composer, there's no author to have to give credit to. So you make it your own and change it all around. Why do we repeat? And I touched on this already a little bit, but why do we repeat a niggun or a chant over and over and over and over and over again? Right. So here's that word groove. The Piaseczner Rebbe, Kalanimus Kalman Shapira, taught that with singing, if at first you have had to make music for your soul, bit by bit, you will feel your soul begin to sing for herself. Now, what does he mean by that? In other words, at the point when my conscious will accedes to the groove of the niggun, I'll no longer be directing it or controlling my soul's self-revelation. That's a lot to chew on. In other words, at the point where my conscious will, right, lets go to the groove that has been established in me by repeating the niggun or chant over and over and over again, that's when I'm no longer be able to direct it or controlling my soul's self-revelation. What will be, will be. What will arise in truth, in all in authenticity. Gail?
Yes, I was just curious what the source of your slides are.
The source of, well, I created the slides,
Oh, okay.
but
So,
if you're interested in the teachings, I can send this to you.
oh, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Um, some of this I got because I just have notes from
Right,
having
of
studied the
course.
Piaseczner, but something that I have too were some notes from a teaching given over by a colleague and friend of mine, Rabbi Hannah Dressner, whose father was also a rabbi, who was really steeped in Hasidic music, and so she kind of bathed in that in her childhood, and she knows more nigunim and more, songs with with settings, that are really Hasidic tinged, than I can ever possibly learn in my lifetime. But so I'll share with you know what? Let me take a screenshot with everybody's here so I don't forget who you are. Bingo. Sherry Cohn, are you on our mailing list? If you'd like to be, put your email in the chat. I'll add you to the mailing list, and I can also send all of this to you after we're done. Okay. This just as parenthetically, this idea of a groove with chanting and a niggun. We can also create grooves that are not so healthy. That's called habitual behavior, right? And those are the things that, we also deal with in our spiritual practices, in trying to break those things. And something I'm also going to be touching on in a different Hasidic teaching on Shabbat from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. One last teaching from the Piaseczner. The song of my soul. Isn't that beautiful? That your soul has a unique song? The song of my soul can arise only when I quiet the urge to think rationally and critically. It will arise only when the still small voice of emotional truth, which is always singing deeper within, can be heard and amplified. Letting go of language quiets the analytical side of my brain, and the liberated vocalizations serve as a medium for laying myself bare before my God. Wow. Wow. In some of his teachings, he's years ahead of, Buddhist practices have existed for a long, long time, but mindfulness practices and Buddhist practices in the West only fairly recently in our time frame. But what he's talking about is quieting the mind, right? Of going to that place of what is called beginner's mind, really quieting the mind to a place of Ein od milvado. There's nothing. There's nothing beside God, and there's no thing. It's a state of no thingness from which another voice may arise. The Piaseczner teaches that once the soul begins to sing, she breaks open a path for ascent or ascent, for ascent to the heights and to the heavens. And the niggun carries your soul in its center to pour her forth and draw you close to God. He concludes with a reminder we don't have to yell. God hears our quiet voices. So le carven, the idea of to draw close, is the same root for karbanot,
Mhm.
same root for sacrifices, right? So in a way, the same thing is happening. When we travel this path, we are sacrificing our ego. We're really placing our ego on the holy fire to be really consumed. So there's nothing left of us, right? It's called negation, right? Of the soul. No, I'm sorry, negation of the ego. It's in that place that we begin to touch the face of divinity, right? Why do we do the Amidah silently? And what does all this happen to do with prayer? Well, I didn't promise to teach you about prayer. It was really, I think I labeled the teaching deepening our prayer, right? And praying through, right? So that's been my intention. And I hope some of these teachings you can use to pray through, whether it be in silence or in whispered prayer, or whether in yelling, to the heavens, I love you. Thank you, God. So a teaching from Reb Zalman. Why do we do the Amidah silently? Oh, I think my face is in the way there. Can you see the whole thing, or do I need to move? Let me move that over. There we go. That's better. Why do we do the Amidah silently? Because the greatest thing we can do is offer our stillness to God, to make ourselves so transparent to the infinite that the ego doesn't offer any resistance. But since this is so difficult, the Amidah consists of all the things which come up in a person's mind. I am so blessed to have had ancestors which created and passed to me a tradition of seeking God. I'm aware of the cycle of life and death. When I still myself, I feel holiness. I'm trying to quiet myself so I can place all of my awareness in the right place, so that I can harmonize myself, so that I can be forgiven my sins. That's a whole other conversation we're not going to get into. What he means by that, what we mean by hate, by sins. And so the Amidah unfolds, but better even than just the recital of the individual prayers is to return after each one to the stillness. So right, he's saying the same thing as I suggested to you, Meira, after your poem, your beautiful offering, right? It needs to be followed by quiet and a place of stillness for things to resonate. I like to think the metaphor of shaking up a snow globe, right? And we watch the little pieces of snow fall quietly. So that's what we're doing. We're watching in that stillness those pieces of paper, probably, little pieces of snow, little flakes of snow falling silently. We return after each one to the stillness and then resume the formal prayer only when you can't hold the stillness anymore. It's a very strong thing to do. A very strong thing to do. All right. This is a lot. So let's take a breather. I'm talking to myself. Let's take a breather for any comments or questions or reflections, Devorah.
So is that last thing that Reb Zalman said, is that a contradiction to the usual praying of the Amida where people just whip through it as fast as possible?
I don't know if I'd call it a contradiction. I think I would call it an instruction.
A different way to do it.
Yeah. So when you daven and you're an experienced davener, eventually, I had Rabbi Sammy Barth, really, really beautiful. He doesn't teach anymore in the Aleph program, but I studied with him, and one of our instructions was to learn the Shemona Esrei. We're talking weekday. What's to say 19, right? 19 blessings. How come it's 19 blessings if it's 18 blessings? Okay, never mind. To learn it by heart, right? Because then once you know it by heart, it begins to, there's the groove, like, we're talking about. It engraves itself in you. You don't have to think about it. And then you can go fast. Once you've practiced going slow, it's like anything else. For any musician has to learn how to play every passage in whatever it is you're learning. When you're practicing, you have to play it slow, right? To become an accomplished fill in the blank. So I don't think it's a contradiction. I think that in the same way that Reb Zalman also, and I don't know if this was a chiddush for him, whether he made this, created this, but he also encouraged us to sometimes with the Amidah, daven each word and take 7 seconds between each word. Daven each word separately. It takes 7 seconds between each one. All right. So why? When I did it, what you're going to give an answer, Devorah?
Well, just to let each one settle.
Yes, but
Just
and
solo.
and more than that, because if you're really in conversation with the tradition, you and the and that particular thing, meaning here the Amidah, and those words mean something to you, you will have done some study, right? What not just each of the words if necessary, but certainly each of the lines mean, each of the paragraphs for sure, right? Before the Chatimah for each paragraph, before the blessing that ends each paragraph. By doing so, all of that study will have created a drop-down menu, right? To use computer speak, that is so large that those files are going to open up in those 7 seconds between each word. You hear what I'm saying? All of the studying. That's why it says Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, that Talmud Torah study is equal to all the other things because it leads to all the other things, right? So I think that's how it played on me, right? So if you go to a shtibel, I don't know what's going on in the minds of those daveners who are whipping through the prayers. But I would hope that those prayers are so engraved in their, kishkish, that all of these things are happening simultaneously. We're supposed to pray with kavanah, are we not? There's some things you have to do with kavanah. Some things you don't have to do with kavanah, and your yotze, fulfills the requirement. Prayer you need to do with kavanah. So I don't think, to answer your question, it's a contradiction. I think it's a way in. Mary, did you want to respond to that, Devorah?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, Mary Ruth.
For me, I'd like to get through DLTI, and especially when we had to do our own interpretive Amidah, we had to write it. It really helped me find the essence of each of the blessings. And so I know that when I pray, whether it's Shabbat or weekday, what rises up in me is the essence of each of them. And then the Hatimah kind of gives me the bridge to the next one.
Yeah.
But there's something about that helps me. Like there are words, like I remember the one, I want to say it's the one that really talks about the Messianic age coming. And I just sat with the Hebrew words and then listening to some of my holy friends, was knowing what they came up with. And I remember listening to Brielle's, and thinking, oh, I didn't even see that image, so that it gave me also images to go. So I am not one that says every single word, but I really feel like I have the ikar of each of the blessings. And I love that,
Right.
and if there, I don't, I can hear people davening sometimes, or definitely at DLTI, I could hear people davening. And that's just like being surrounded by angels, It's like,
Yeah, there's an updraft when you're davening with people
yeah,
who
yeah.
know how to pray, and they're shuckling and they're familiar and they're more than familiar with the text. I just want to point three things out if I can remember them all that I tried to bookmark while you were talking. Number one is when we share acronyms for things, not all of us know what they mean. So let's make sure DLTI, the Davening Leadership Training Institute, where a number of us have attended. It is it's the entry drug to Jewish renewal. It's where I got turned on. It's a training program of leading in the style of Reb Zalman, in a way that is basically in the lineage of Chassidut, Neo Chassidus. Number two, God, what other things did you say? Oh yeah, now I can't. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a wonderful exercise. To put each paragraph into our own words. That is why it's called avodah. Avodah means work. It's besides meaning service to God. It means work. This is work, right? If you put the work in, you will glean the harvest, right? And others will also, pick from the edges of your fields.
It
Okay,
makes
enough of
my
that metaphor.
grooves.
Yeah,
It makes and deepens my grooves.
yeah, that's right. Deep as the grooves, Devorah.
Well, Mary Reed, I just want to thank you for going there, because as Rabbi Mark was talking in addressing my question, in my mind, I was sitting in my screen room at the cottage doing exactly that assignment before going to DLTI. And I was seeing myself turning the pages and writing the words and everything. So it connects. It's just exactly the same thing. So thank you.
All righty. Thank you all. Anybody else have anything you'd like to share? Oh, does Sherry leave us? Okay. And she put her email address in the chat. Wonderful. Mira, and then we're going to do a practice to close out.
So I did it an exercise like that, rewriting a psalm, and Psalm 23 actually, and it was one of the most meaningful. It's almost hard to even describe it, because it accompanied me in my cancer recovery, and so I said every day and memorized it and said it first thing in the morning. And even now I could just even get a piece of it and feel the strength that it provided for me. So that was a beautiful way of turning prayer into something that really supported me.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And it's so important to remember that, oh, Sherry, you're back. That the rabbis never intended for prayer to be static. Never intended to us to be reading from the prayer book, and that was all. In the Talmud, it says that prayer should be 50% keva and half kavana, right? So one of my dreams has always been to facilitate a like a shockwave, for instance. That was just that. That was as much as a jazz get together as it was a fixed davening experience, so that anyone at any time could break out of, and we'd have to use English, obviously, because not everybody is fluent in Hebrew, in the use of Hebrew in prayer. But to have a prayer jam, it actually was one of my original dreams for Minyan Oneg Shabbat when I began. That being, and the only way that can happen is in person, right? And that it would then be wedded to movement. You were talking before of Gail, right? So that it would be a prayer dance that was both had a matbea to it, an order to the service, but also a jazz influence that anybody could go anywhere. And of course, you'd have to listen to each other, just as good jazz musicians. So just bookmark that. Maybe someday when we're all together, we can experiment with that. All righty, we're coming in for a landing here. I want to share with you a practice of my friend Hannah Dressner, Rabbi Hannah Dressner. And I will send this to you to play with on your own. Let me read it to you, and we'll see where we are at the end. Maybe we can just play with it in our own spaces, and I'll mute myself. But here we go. Number one. And this again is with the use of a niggun. The whole thing's not fitting. Can I move my face over? Hold on a second. There we go. Good. Can you see the whole thing? Yeah, okay. Sit quietly. The niggun begins as an internal song, not even audible in its first phrases. So keep in mind that you would have to have gone into this practice with a niggun, with a melody. And I really encourage to be as very simple that you know better than the back of your hand. So the niggun begins as an internal song, not even audible in its first phrases. Resting in the baseline of quiet, I still my conscious will to allow whatever is going to be expressed to emerge of its own accord, meaning that you're not going to force anything. The niggun that you planted will kind of like be sitting there like a seed in the darkness, just waiting to emerge. And the stillness, the baseline of quiet, is going to serve as the water, right, that begins to awaken the unique seed that knows what it is, right? I still my conscious will to allow whatever is going to be expressed to emerge of its own accord. So now you wait. The niggun begins as an internal song, not even audible in its first phrase. Sometimes now it begins to emerge. The niggun raises me to heights. So what's happening now is it's becoming audible. I think something happened in here in my copying of this. So when you get it, you'll get it as it was meant to be articulated. So out of the quiet emerges the niggun. Your ears can now hear it. It can be almost inaudible, imperceptible. But then it begins to take on a life of its own. It grows as that seed grows. And on any given day, my practice may be contemplative or ecstatic, a refuge or a supplication. So what you don't know what form that niggun is going to take when it emerges, when you give birth to it, as if you had never sang it before, as a baby, right? It's been hiding in the darkness. And you might repeat it over and over and over again, and you might end up dancing around the room as all those wonderful stories of the Baal Shem Tov, beginning davening at one end of the room and then ends up at the other end of the room. Or you might sing it very quietly, sotto voce, and contemplatively. It might serve as a refuge, or it might emerge as something that you're asking for. It takes wings that you could not have predicted was going to happen. So now this plays itself out, and you sing it over and over and over again. It might be like a shapeshifter. And then slow it down till you return to a resting place. Right? You return to that place of stillness as the niggun resonates within me. I experience understandings that sometime later I might be able to articulate. But not in that moment. Don't try to figure things out. Let your mind rest. Let yourself marinate, use that word again, in the quiet, in the rippling, the afterbirth of the niggun. My interior hushes to a quiet calm, more calm than the quiet in which I began. Like, really hear what she's saying as this invitation. If you practice this in the way it's intended, the quiet that is in the after the niggun will take it to a quieter place. I liken that to being in the desert, right? Where things are so still, there's a stillness that is palpable. This quiet has the effect of having emptied everything. Pardon my misspelling here. Emptied everything. No thing. I sit in quiet intimacy with God, resting in God's embrace and imagining that God is resting in me. Wow, huh? So I look forward to hearing back from each and every one of you of what your experience was in using this as a spiritual practice, hopefully someday soon. Right? It would be, I think, of greater value if you assigned a week, right? Don't just do it once and then let me know. Take a whole week. And the rabbis say that you have to spend 40 days. There's that magic number. 40 days with a new practice before it begins to get groovy. Right? Before it really becomes a practice. So I look forward to hearing back from you at any time on what your experience of this was. Gail.
So to start with, should we start with the one we used tonight?
I want to encourage you to, you can, I mean, you've heard that so many times.
Right.
I suggested just using the first part because it's relatively long,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's when you sing it to that text, it's neither a niggun nor a chant, really.
Okay.
A chant is a much simpler phrase repeated over and over again,
Yeah.
right? Um, if you're comfortable with, pick a phrase that resonates for you, a sacred phrase, from sacred text, right?
Okay.
That belongs to you, that really enlivens you, you know. And you can just say it over and over again. That is a meditation, anchor
Right.
device, right?
Yeah.
Or it can be one word. Sometimes we meditate on the tetragrammaton, Yud He Vav He. But if you find a few words that really resonate with you, and you're comfortable with starting to sing them,
Hmm.
until you arrive at a melody that, oh wow, look what I got here, that you can then repeat over and over again to the
Mhm.
point that the melody feels married to that text, and then sing it so many times that there's the sense that you're not sure who's singing.
Ah,
You know,
yeah.
is it you that's singing it, or is it a voice within? The answer
Mhm.
is yes, of course,
Yeah.
but it will serve to annihilate, that thought, to quiet the mind.
Because I've done kirtan, the
Yeah,
Hindu
absolutely.
chant.
That's kirtan. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I got a book called Mantras and Singing. And so there's a number of choices there. Of course, they're all in Sanskrit, but I'll do it.
Lava. Yes. Yeah. If you want to use that, use that.
Okay.
Put
For
it
sure.
upside down, and that's Hebrew.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, I still get caught up in the difference between clearing the mind and focusing the mind.
Mm.
In a sense that you want to not have thoughts, words, past or present, past or future. You want to be
Yeah.
in the present and that no thingness.
Yeah.
But then also with some of the not the niguns, but the chanting and all this, where there are words and there's a kavanah. I guess you can end up focusing on something, which is fine because then your mind is not on anything else. It's just on the one thing.
Mhm.
But I guess they're both avenues to the same idea.
Well, I think that you've pointed out an important thing, which are different types of meditation, right? There's a meditation that perhaps we arrive at when we say the Shema that leads us into a place of non-duality, right? Of clearing the mind, of allowing like you said, clearing out, you know. But then the insight meditation is something different, because that's when we're focusing the mind and paying attention to what's arising, right? Taking notice of what arises, because those are things that are things to then be to work on, to after the meditation, to come back to, and to really to have intention to our processes about like any process that we're refining things, like in Musar, right? There's intentions there to refine things. We're not forgetting about ourselves. We're being mindful of our of our behavior, right? Of those grooves that are not so great for us, right? So mindfulness meditation is quite different than this kind of work. We might end up in the same place, but it's a little different in scope and where we're putting our what say goal, but and how just the process. Does that make sense, Dan?
Sort of, yeah. It's I need to work on that more, or figure it out more.
Okay. All right. If anybody else, I have one more bit of wisdom to share with you, and it's a quote from actually a guru named Sadhguru, I shared this through our meditation this afternoon. Again, many rivers, many paths, one God. I'm going to share this with you on the screen. The whole effort of the spiritual process is to break the boundaries you have drawn for yourself and experience the immensity that you are. The aim is to unshackle yourself from the limited identity you have forged as a result of your ignorance and live the way the Creator made you, utterly blissful and infinitely responsible. I will share that with you as well. That teaching, we could spend an hour and 15 minutes unpacking through a Jewish spiritual lens. In the same way that when I go and I sit with Tara Brach, who is a guru of mindfulness, of insight meditation, all the while she's teaching, I am translating what she says through my lens. Oh, this is how, oh, that's, that's Rabbi Akiva, or that's Rabbi Nachman. Oh, Reb Zalman said that, but, using a different words. So, my sweet friends, thank you for coming with me on the journey tonight. Sherry, welcome to the mosh pit. Hopefully we'll see you again, be able to welcoming you soon. Let's sing it. Shiviti. Shiviti Havaya L'negdi Tamid Havaya, 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 Havaya Ahava, 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 Shiviti Havaya L'negdi Tamid. I set Havaya before me always. Iti Havaya L'negdi Tamid. Havaya, 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 Ahava, Ahava. Thank you all so much. If you weren't here,